This is one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history. A child beauty queen, a chilling ransom note, and a web of suspicions that has never been fully untangled. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey. Let's start at the beginning. December 26, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado. Around 5:30 a.m., Patsy Ramsey went downstairs and discovered a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note. The note demanded $118,000 for the return of JonBenét. The instructions were very specific. "We have your daughter. We want $118,000. Don't involve the authorities." Despite this chilling warning, the Ramseys called the police at 5:52 a.m. Immediately after, they called their friends and pastor, who arrived at their house shortly after the police. The two police officers that arrived first checked the house, looking for the place the intruder would have entered and exited. They also sealed off JonBenét's bedroom. The friends that arrived started cleaning surfaces in the house, and everyone passed around the ransom note to read. The lead detective, Linda Arndt, arrived at the house at 8 a.m., which was the time the kidnapper said they would be in touch. Nobody called. By 10 a.m., only one police officer remained in the house. At 1 p.m., Detective Arndt asked John Ramsey and his friend to look around the house to see if anything was missing. They went downstairs to the basement, opened a door, and found JonBenét. She was on the floor. Her mouth was covered with duct tape. Her hands and neck were tied with a nylon cord, and her torso was covered with a blanket. She was dead. John Ramsey scooped her up, pulled the duct tape from her mouth, and carried her upstairs. It was clear she had been murdered. Despite the crime scene already being compromised, it became even more compromised when JonBenét's parents were allowed to lay down next to their dead child and cover her with a blanket. Following the discovery of JonBenét, blood, hair, writing samples, and fingerprints were taken from the Ramseys, and John and Patsy Ramsey were questioned for 2 hours. What started as a kidnapping was now a homicide. The autopsy showed that JonBenét had been hit on the head, causing a skull fracture, then strangled with a garrote made from a nylon cord and part of a paintbrush handle. She had been sexually assaulted. Her official cause of death is asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. Within days, every news outlet around the world was running the story of a 6-year-old girl found murdered in her parents' home. The focus was not the murder or the murderer. It was the fact that JonBenét was a 6-year-old beauty queen. People were outraged. The costumes, hair, and makeup on a 6-year-old child that made her look much older was abhorrent to most. It was clear that fingers were being pointed at the parents, not just by the media but by the police. What the Boulder Police Department didn't make public at the time was that the Ramseys had in fact already cooperated extensively. They had provided DNA samples, handwriting exemplars, and the clothing they wore both the night before and the morning JonBenét was found. They had also sat through multiple rounds of questioning on December 26th, 27th, and 28th, 1996. Despite this, police continued to tell the media that the Ramseys were refusing to cooperate. In truth, they had done everything investigators had asked. On April 30th, 1997, John and Patsy Ramsey each sat for separate 6-hour formal interviews. Detectives later admitted these sessions produced no new information. So was the Boulder Police Department deflecting blame to conceal its own missteps. After all, officers had unrestricted access to the Ramsey home, yet they failed to locate JonBenét's body. It was John Ramsey himself who made the discovery. One officer later claimed that the door to the basement room was locked, which is why they never checked it. But if that were true, why didn't anyone simply ask for a key? It was Detective Linda Arndt who, 5 hours after arriving on scene, instructed John Ramsey and family friend Fleet White to conduct a final search of the house to see if anything seemed missing. That decision led directly to the discovery of JonBenét's body. Afterward, it was Arndt who moved JonBenét's body a second time and covered her with a blanket, further compromising the crime scene. In the months that followed, Arndt became one of the department's most controversial figures. In a 1997 interview with ABC's 2020, she openly criticized the investigation and described a moment of fear inside the Ramsey home, claiming that as she stood there with John Ramsey, she knew he was the killer and that she feared for her life. That statement, however, was never mentioned in her original police report, and many colleagues accused her of undermining the investigation for personal attention. Under growing scrutiny, and amid a fractured police department and public backlash, Linda Arndt resigned from the Boulder Police Department in 1999. She later said she left because she could no longer support the way the case was being handled. Another fact that many people were not made aware of was that less than 12 months later, in September 1997, a 12-year-old girl was attacked in her bedroom only a few kilometers away from the Ramsey house. He was disturbed by the little girl's mother, who heard a noise and went to investigate. The intruder escaped. The police believe these crimes were not linked. That was nearly 30 years ago. Here is the list of suspects that have been investigated so far. It was clear that the Boulder Police Department believed the Ramseys were involved. Any possibility that this crime was committed by an intruder was dismissed. The belief was either that JonBenét was being molested by her father and murdered to cover it up, or that her mother had snapped and hit her over the head for bedwetting, then thinking she was already dead, staged a crime scene including putting a garrote around her daughter's neck, and lastly that Burke Ramsey had hit his sister over the head out of frustration, and then his parents staged a crime scene to cover it up. The main piece of evidence to support this claim was the ransom note. Experts claimed the note was too long, too detailed, and that the person who wrote it would have to know the Ramseys well, as the amount asked for was the same as the amount that John was given as a Christmas bonus the year before. The Ramseys have always denied these stories. A homicide detective named Lou Smith came out of retirement in early 1997 to investigate this case. In May 1998, he presented his findings, believing the crime had been perpetrated by an intruder. This didn't fit with the narrative the Boulder Police Department had, so they were unwilling to listen. Smith resigned. In 1999, a grand jury had recommended that the Ramseys be charged with placing a child at risk in a way that caused her death. The district attorney disagreed with these findings, and the Ramseys were not charged. July 9, 2008. With the advancement of DNA testing, the DNA found in JonBenét's underwear conclusively exonerated the Ramsey family. In a public statement by the DA's office, they were cleared of any involvement. Their housekeeper, Linda Hoffman Pugh, became outspoken and stated she was sure Patsy had committed the crime and had a split personality. What was not shared at the time was that Linda and her husband Mervyn were being investigated and being shunned by their own neighbors, which was why they were pointing fingers at the Ramseys. Linda had a key to the Ramsey house, was familiar with the layout, including JonBenét's bedroom, the basement where she was found, and they knew how much John Ramsey got as a bonus. She had also asked to borrow money from Patsy, which she had agreed to lend them. But with the ongoing investigation, this request was forgotten. Linda was paid quite handsomely for her interviews pointing the finger at the Ramseys. In 2008, the same DNA testing that exonerated the Ramseys exonerated Linda and Mervyn. Chris Wolf, a journalist, was implicated by his then-girlfriend. He had apparently stormed out of the house Christmas night and came home the next morning with muddy clothing. He had a great dislike for John Ramsey and the company he worked for, claiming they were exploiting third-world countries. The T-shirt he was wearing had Santa Barbara Tennis Club written on the front, which could be where the letters SBTC come from in the ransom note. The biggest piece of evidence came years later when Wolf's ex-girlfriend took out a paid advertisement, comparing Wolf's handwriting to that of the ransom note. She put together handwriting taken from Wolf's journals. Experts believe the handwriting is a match. However, to this day, Chris Wolf has refused to submit an official handwriting sample to police. Bill McReynolds was investigated as he had played Santa at the Ramseys' house a few days before Christmas. And one of the other children there remembered JonBenét saying that Santa had told her she would be getting a special present after Christmas. Did McReynolds come back? Another coincidence is that McReynolds' daughter had been kidnapped on the 26th of December 1974 with her friend who had been molested. Both girls were let go. 2 years later, McReynolds' wife wrote a play about a little girl being tortured and murdered in a basement. McReynolds died in 2002. DNA testing exonerated him. Gary Oliva is probably the most convincing suspect. Oliva has a fascination with knots and stealing art supplies. In 1990, he went to jail for abusing a 7-year-old girl and was released the following year. He attempted to strangle his mother and was jailed again for 17 months. When he was released, he moved to Boulder, Colorado, and used an address just 10 blocks from the Ramsey house when JonBenét was murdered. On the day JonBenét was murdered, Oliva called a friend and confessed to the murder. This friend told the police at the time, but it was dismissed. He tried to contact the police again a few months later and was ignored again. December 2000. Oliva was arrested on drug charges. In his backpack is a photo of JonBenét and a poem he wrote about her. Police also find a stun gun that some have theorized was used on JonBenét. At the time, Oliva denied any involvement in the murder but did confess to being obsessed with her. In 2016, Oliva was arrested again, this time for having child abuse photos on his phone. He also had 335 pictures relating to JonBenét, including pictures of her autopsy. He was sentenced to 10 years in jail. While in jail, he confessed to her murder. His handwriting is a match, but his DNA is not. He was not charged with her murder and was released from jail in 2024. He is a free man today. If you have any information about this case, please call 720-913-STOP or online at metrodenvercrimestoppers.com. Nearly 3 decades later, the case of JonBenét Ramsey remains unsolved, a case defined by mistakes, speculation, and questions that still don't have answers. But every discussion, every new perspective, keeps her story alive and the search for truth moving forward. What do you believe happened that night in Boulder? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments. I respond to every one of them. Together, let's keep this conversation going, because justice begins with not forgetting. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again soon.